Emily cried the day we signed the agreement. Not because she wanted to fight, because she wanted Lily to have the stability she now understood our marriage had failed to provide. Our new apartment overlooked a quiet river lined with trees. Every morning, Lily and I walked to school together before I headed to the office. Those walks quickly became my favorite part of the day. "Dad," Lily asked one crisp autumn morning as we crossed a small bridge, "do you still have business meetings today?" "I do. Will you be home for dinner?" I smiled. I already told my assistant that dinner with my daughter is the most important meeting on my schedule. She laughed. "Can meetings be canceled?" "Some can." "What about ours?" "Never." Her grin widened as she slipped her hand into mine. Moments like that reminded me why I had chosen a different future. Not because life had become perfect, but because Lily never again had to wonder whether she came second. Emily visited every month. The first few visits were awkward. We spoke carefully, avoiding old wounds while learning how to become partners in a different way. Not husband and wife, simply parents. One afternoon, after Lily ran ahead to play in a nearby park, Emily and I sat quietly on a bench. The silence between us felt different now. No longer tense, only thoughtful. She looked toward the playground before speaking. "I've been wanting to say something." I nodded. "I'm listening." She took a slow breath. "For a long time, I blamed my work. Then I blamed stress. Then I blamed bad timing." She shook her head. "But none of those things were the real reason." I remained silent. She continued. "I stopped protecting the boundaries that mattered. I convinced myself that small choices didn't matter because there was never one big mistake." Her eyes glistened. I was wrong. I remembered the words Lily had asked a year earlier. "Why didn't you protect our family?" Emily had clearly never forgotten them either. She looked at me with quiet sincerity. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I allowed emotional boundaries to disappear. I expected you to understand everything without realizing I had stopped trying to understand you." There were no excuses in her voice, only honesty. That honesty couldn't change the past, but it mattered. I nodded gently. "Thank you for saying it." For the first time in a long while, we shared a conversation without anger, blame, or defensiveness. Only two parents who had finally learned from the mistakes that had nearly cost them the person they both loved most. As the months passed, Emily and I settled into a rhythm that placed Lily at the center of every decision. We coordinated school events, birthdays, and holidays without arguments. If Lily had a recital, we both attended. If she won an award, we celebrated together. We no longer measured success by whether our marriage could be repaired. We measured it by the smile on our daughter's face. She no longer looked confused or caught between two parents. She simply knew she was loved. Jason Miller quietly disappeared from our lives. Several months after the divorce became final, he requested a transfer to another police district. Before leaving, he sent Emily a brief message wishing her and Lily well. There were no attempts to rekindle what had never truly existed. Perhaps he had finally realized that he was never the solution to Emily's unhappiness. The emptiness she had felt had never been about finding someone new. It had been about neglecting what she already had. Emily never spoke badly about him. Neither did I. The past no longer needed another villain. It simply needed to remain where it belonged. Spring arrived with warm sunshine and blooming trees. Lily's primary school graduation ceremony filled the auditorium, with proud families holding flowers and cameras. Children laughed nervously as they waited for their names to be called. I sat beside Emily in the front row. A year earlier, sharing the same room would have felt impossible. Now it felt natural. When Lily walked across the stage to receive her certificate, the audience erupted in applause. She looked toward us immediately. Our eyes met. She smiled the same bright smile she had worn before life became complicated. Only now, it carried confidence instead of uncertainty. After the ceremony, she ran straight into my arms. "Dad." I lifted her off the ground, laughing as she wrapped her arms around my neck. "You did it, princess." She held up her certificate proudly. "I told you I'd make you proud." "You already did." Emily stepped closer and hugged Lily too. For a moment, the three of us stood together. Not as the family we once imagined, but as the family we had learned to become. Different, healthier, honest. As Lily hurried off to take pictures with her classmates, Emily remained beside me. The afternoon sun warmed the school courtyard. Parents chatted nearby, while children played one last game before summer vacation. Emily watched Lily laughing with her friends. Then she quietly said, "I need to thank you." I looked at her. She smiled sadly but sincerely. "You became the father Lily always deserved, even after our marriage ended." I shook my head gently. "We both learned what she deserved." Emily nodded. "I wish I had learned it sooner." "So do I." Neither of us pretended that the past could be rewritten. Some losses remain permanent. Some opportunities never return. But growth is measured by what we choose afterward. I watched Lily waving excitedly for us to join another family photograph. Without hesitation, Emily and I walked toward her together. As the camera flashed, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. Leaving my marriage had never been about escaping pain. It had been about protecting the little girl who once stood on a beach wondering why her father wasn't there. Now she would never have to ask that question again. She knew exactly where to find me. At every important moment, every celebration, every challenge, every ordinary day. Standing beside her. The marriage had ended, but my greatest role had never changed. I was Lily's father, and protecting her from emotional neglect was the greatest decision I had ever made. As we walked home together beneath the warm afternoon sky, I knew success would never be measured by the company I built or the opportunities one accepted. It would always be measured by one simple promise I intended to keep for the rest of my life. My daughter would never again wonder whether she came first. My name is Daniel Brooks. Most people knew me as the founder of a successful technology company that had grown from a small startup into an international business. Newspapers often described me as calm, practical, and hardworking. Investors praised my judgment, and employees trusted my leadership. But none of those achievements mattered as much to me as my family. My wife, Captain Emily Brooks, was one of the most respected police officers in the city. She had earned her position through years of discipline, courage, and relentless dedication. People admired her professionalism, and I admired it too. When we first met, I loved the confidence she carried into every room. She had always been someone who rushed toward danger, while others stepped back. I understood the demands of her career. Late-night calls, unexpected investigations, canceled dinners, missed anniversaries. Over the years, I accepted all of it because I believed we were building a future together. Whenever Emily apologized for working overtime, I smiled and told her not to worry. I married a police officer. I often joked. I knew what I was signing up for. She would laugh, kiss my cheek, and promise she would make it up to me. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she couldn't. Still, I never stopped trying. Our 8-year-old daughter, Lily Brooks, had been counting down the days to our family vacation for nearly 2 months. She had drawn pictures of beaches, packed and repacked her suitcase 3 different times, and reminded us every evening how many days remained. "Daddy," she asked one night while sitting beside me on the living room floor, "we're really all going together this time, right?" I smiled and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "Of course. No work. No work." She looked toward Emily, who had just come home from another late shift. "And Mommy?" Emily smiled warmly. "I already requested my leave." Lily clapped her hands with excitement. "Then it's going to be the best vacation ever." Watching her happiness made every long workday feel worthwhile. Emily and I had postponed this trip twice because of unexpected cases. This time, we promised nothing would interfere. Or so I believed. The morning of our departure began differently. I woke before sunrise and finished loading the luggage into the car. The house was unusually quiet. Emily walked downstairs already dressed, but not in casual vacation clothes. She was wearing her police uniform. A knot formed in my stomach. "Emily." She avoided my eyes while fastening the last button on her jacket. "I'm sorry. What happened?" "There was an emergency call early this morning." I frowned. "But you requested leave." "I know." She sighed heavily. "The department is short-handed. The chief asked me to assist with an urgent assignment." I looked at the packed suitcases waiting by the front door. "What about the vacation?" "You and Lily should still go." I shook my head immediately. "We planned this together." She hesitated before speaking again. "Actually, There are some complications. My chest tightened. What complications? She finally looked at me. The assignment involves sensitive information. I've been advised that it's better if you don't travel with us right now. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. What do you mean? It's only temporary, she replied quickly. I'll explain everything later. Lily and I can join you afterward. She forced a reassuring smile. I promise. Something about her explanation felt incomplete, but I wanted to trust her. I always had. Lily came running downstairs a few minutes later, wearing a bright yellow backpack almost as big as she was. She looked from me to Emily with a puzzled expression. Mommy, why are you wearing your uniform? Emily knelt beside her. Sweetheart, something important came up at work. Lily's smile faded. So, we're not going? Emily gently took her hands. You and Mommy are still going. Lily blinked. What about Daddy? Emily hesitated. Daddy has to stay home this time. Lily immediately turned toward me. But you promised. The disappointment in her voice hurt more than I expected. I forced a smile. I know, Princess. Sometimes grown-up plans change. She hugged me tightly. I don't want them to. Neither did I. I watched from the front porch as Emily loaded the luggage into her SUV. Lily kept looking back through the window, waving at me with a confused smile that never reached her eyes. I stood there until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. The silence afterward felt overwhelming. I walked back into the empty house, telling myself Emily was telling the truth. She had never given me a reason to doubt her before. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. Around noon, my phone vibrated. It was a message from an acquaintance who happened to be staying at the same coastal resort. The text contained only one sentence. I thought you were coming too. Below it were several photos. My hands froze. The first picture showed Emily standing near the beach, smiling more brightly than I had seen in months. Lily stood beside her, holding a bucket of seashells. A man stood on Emily's other side. His arm rested casually across the back of her chair. I recognized him immediately. Jason Miller, Emily's former police academy classmate. The man she had once admitted having a crush on years before we met. Another photo showed the three of them eating dinner together. In another, Jason and Lily were building a sandcastle while Emily laughed nearby. Anyone looking at those pictures would have assumed they were a happy family enjoying a vacation. Except I wasn't in a single one. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. I called Emily immediately. She answered after several rings. Daniel, I thought you said you had an emergency assignment. There was a long silence. Finally, she spoke. I can explain. Then explain. She sighed. Jason happened to be nearby. He heard Lily and I were coming. It didn't seem like a big deal. I closed my eyes. So he was just already there? Yes. And you didn't think to tell me? I didn't want you to misunderstand. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. You didn't want me to misunderstand? I found out from someone else's photographs. It's not what it looks like. Then what does it look like, Emily? She had no answer. Only silence. That silence told me more than any explanation could. After ending the call, I sat alone in the living room. The vacation brochures Lily had left on the coffee table suddenly felt like painful reminders of promises that had never been kept. I quietly canceled every remaining reservation connected to the trip. Hotel upgrades, excursions, transportation, one by one. Then my phone rang again. This time, it was an international number. Mr. Brooks? A familiar voice greeted me. This is Michael Anderson from Horizon Global. We've finalized the overseas expansion project. You once said that if the opportunity ever became real, you'd consider leading it personally. I remained silent. The offer had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. It would require relocating overseas for at least 3 years. A fresh start. A completely different future. Have you made a decision? Michael asked. I looked at the family photos sitting on the bookshelf. A picture taken years ago, when Emily smiled at me instead of someone else. For the first time since our marriage began to drift apart, I allowed myself to imagine a life without constantly fighting to hold it together. Maybe the greatest journey waiting for me wasn't the family vacation I had missed. Maybe it was the future I had never dared to consider until now. The morning after Emily left for the vacation, Our house felt strangely unfamiliar. Lily's favorite stuffed rabbit was still sitting on the living room couch. A pair of tiny sandals rested neatly by the front door. Emily's coffee mug remained in the kitchen sink. Everything looked exactly as it had the day before. Yet somehow, it no longer felt like home. I stood quietly in the silence until my phone rang. The screen displayed an international number. "Mr. Brooks," Michael Anderson said warmly. "I hope you've had time to consider our proposal." I looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "I have, and I accept." There was a brief pause before Michael laughed happily. "Excellent. We'll begin preparing your relocation documents immediately. The executive position will be ready within 6 weeks. We're looking forward to working with you." After ending the call, I remained standing by the window. 6 weeks. That was all the time separating my old life from a completely different future. Instead of feeling afraid, I felt something unexpected: relief. For months, I had fought to save a marriage that only one person seemed to notice was falling apart. Now I was finally choosing a future where I didn't have to beg for a place in my own family. My next call was to Grace Turner. Grace had been my attorney for years. She was brilliant, practical, and never allowed emotions to cloud important decisions. She arrived at my office that afternoon carrying several folders. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so suddenly," she admitted. "What happened?" Without speaking, I handed her my phone. She slowly looked through the vacation photographs. Her expression darkened. "So your wife told you she couldn't travel because of work?" I nodded. "And then she took another man on the family vacation." "That's what happened." Grace placed the phone on the desk. "What do you want to do?" I answered immediately. "I want to file for divorce." She studied my face carefully. "Are you certain? This isn't anger. It isn't revenge. I've simply reached the point where I understand that waiting won't change anything." Grace nodded quietly. "I'll begin preparing the paperwork." She opened one of her folders. "There are also the property agreements, your business assets, custody arrangements." We spent the next 2 hours reviewing every detail. The conversation remained calm, professional, orderly. It felt strange discussing the end of my marriage with such clarity. But deep inside, the decision had already been made. When Grace finished organizing the documents, she closed the final folder. "Daniel." I looked up. "I've represented people going through painful divorces for more than 20 years. Most of them are desperate to win. You don't seem interested in winning anything." I smiled faintly, because I'm not trying to defeat Emily. I'm trying to stop losing myself. Grace didn't say another word. She simply nodded with quiet understanding. That evening, I met my childhood friend Ryan Cooper for dinner. Ryan owned a small construction company and had known me since we were 12 years old. Unlike me, he never hesitated to speak his mind. The moment I showed him the photographs, he set his fork down. "You've got to be kidding. I wish I were." He looked at the image of Emily, Jason, and Lily sitting together by the beach. "Daniel, this isn't just about another guy. This is about your wife treating you like you don't belong in your own family." His blunt honesty stung because it was true. Ryan leaned forward. "Answer me honestly. When was the last time Emily chose you first?" I searched for an answer. None came. Ryan watched my silence and slowly shook his head. "That's your answer." He leaned back in his chair. "You've spent years understanding her job, accepting canceled plans, making excuses for her, and waiting for things to get better." He folded his arms. "When has she done the same for you?" I couldn't remember. Not because Emily had never cared about me, but because somewhere along the way, caring had quietly become taking me for granted. Ryan looked me straight in the eyes. "You deserve to be chosen, Daniel, not remembered after everyone else." His words stayed with me long after we left the restaurant. For years, I had measured love by how much I was willing to sacrifice. I had never stopped to ask whether sacrifice was supposed to flow in both directions. That night, I returned home and carefully packed a small suitcase. Not because I was leaving immediately, because I was finally preparing to. Hundreds of miles away, Emily continued enjoying the family vacation. She still believed I was simply staying behind because of the work assignment she had invented. Whenever guilt surfaced, she pushed it aside. "I'll explain everything when we get home," she told herself. "Daniel always understands." She convinced herself that one honest conversation would erase the hurt. Meanwhile, Jason Miller became increasingly comfortable acting as though he belonged. At breakfast, he carried Lily's tray before Emily could. During afternoon walks, he insisted on holding the beach umbrella over Emily. When they visited a local aquarium, he automatically stood beside Emily and Lily whenever tourists offered to take their picture. Each time, Lily quietly stepped away. No one seemed to notice except the photographers, who often asked, "Should your daughter stand closer?" Lily would simply shake her head. "I want to stand here." One afternoon, Jason surprised Lily with a stuffed dolphin from the resort gift shop. "I saw you looking at it yesterday," he said with a smile. Lily accepted the toy politely. "Thank you." But instead of hugging it, she tucked it into her backpack without another word. Jason looked confused. "Don't you like it?" "I do." "Then why aren't you smiling?" Lily looked toward the ocean. "My daddy always buys me one souvenir." "I was waiting for him." Jason's smile faded. Emily overheard the conversation from a few steps away. A strange ache settled in her chest. She walked over and gently brushed Lily's hair behind her ear. "Sweetheart." Lily looked up. "Yes, Mommy? Are you having fun?" Lily nodded automatically. "Yes." But her voice lacked its usual excitement. That evening, during dinner, Lily barely touched her food. She answered questions with 1 or 2 words. She spent more time staring at the empty chair across the table than at the beautiful sunset outside. Emily finally noticed. "Lily, are you feeling sick?" "No." "Then what's wrong?" Lily hesitated. Finally, she whispered, "I miss Daddy." Emily reached across the table. "We'll see him in a few days." Lily lowered her eyes. "I wanted him to be here now." The words lingered between them. Emily suddenly realized that no matter how carefully she explained everything later, she couldn't give Lily back the vacation she had imagined. Still, she convinced herself the damage wasn't permanent. "Daniel will understand," she thought again. "He always does." She had no idea that while she was planning explanations, I was signing relocation documents. While she imagined returning to our ordinary life, Grace Turner was preparing divorce papers. While she believed our marriage was waiting patiently at home, I was quietly packing away every memory that had once convinced me we would grow old together. She thought I was waiting for her. The truth was far simpler. For the first time in years, I had finally stopped waiting. The final morning of the vacation arrived beneath clear blue skies. Families filled the beach with laughter. Children raced through the sand carrying colorful kites. Music drifted from the nearby resort cafe. Everything looked exactly as it had when we first arrived. Everything except Emily. For reasons she could not explain, an uneasy feeling had followed her since the previous evening. Lily barely smiled anymore. Jason still tried to keep the atmosphere cheerful, but every conversation felt forced. Even the ocean seemed strangely quiet. Emily stood on the hotel balcony watching the sunrise when her phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar office number. She answered absent-mindedly. "This is Emily Brooks." "Captain Brooks?" A calm woman's voice answered. "My name is Grace Turner. I'm Daniel Brooks' attorney." Emily frowned. "My husband's attorney?" "Yes." A cold feeling settled into her chest. "Is Daniel all right?" "Mr. Brooks is safe." Grace paused briefly. "I'm calling because several legal documents require confirmation that you've been formally notified." Emily gripped the railing. "What legal documents?" "The first concerns Mr. Brooks' acceptance of an executive position with Horizon Global." Emily blinked. "What?" "He officially accepted the overseas appointment several days ago. He'll be relocating abroad." Emily's heartbeat quickened. "Relocating? For how long?" "The initial contract is 3 years." 3 years. Her knees weakened. She leaned against the balcony for support. "He never mentioned that." Grace continued gently. "He made his decision shortly after the family vacation began." Emily struggled to understand. "That's impossible. He would have talked to me." There was another brief silence. Then Grace spoke again. "He chose not to." The word struck harder than Emily expected. She remembered every argument Daniel had patiently ended, every apology he had accepted, every disappointment he had quietly endured. For years, he had always come back to the conversation. This time, He hadn't. Grace continued. There is something else. Emily barely whispered. What? Mr. Brooks has signed divorce documents. The world seemed to stop. Emily stared at the horizon without seeing it. No, I'm afraid that's correct. The paperwork has already been filed. Emily's breathing became uneven. There has to be some mistake. There isn't. He instructed me personally. Tears slowly filled her eyes. He didn't even try to talk to me. Grace answered honestly. Captain Brooks. I believe he spent a very long time trying. Emily closed her eyes. Every canceled anniversary. Every lonely dinner. Every broken promise. Every time Daniel smiled and said, It's all right. None of it had been all right. Grace continued with quiet professionalism. Mr. Brooks also completed the transfer of executive authority for his company before departing. He left detailed instructions for the board. Emily whispered, He already left? Yes. His flight departed this morning. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. Daniel wasn't preparing to leave. He was already gone, thousands of miles away, without an argument, without asking her to stay, without begging her to choose their marriage. For the first time since they met, he had simply walked away. Grace's final words were gentle. I truly wish things had ended differently. The call disconnected. Emily remained frozen on the balcony, staring at the silent phone in her trembling hands. The vacation she thought she could explain later had already cost her everything. Emily remained on the balcony long after the call ended. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, but she no longer noticed the waves or the bright morning sun. Grace's words echoed over and over in her mind. He accepted the overseas position. He signed the divorce documents. His flight departed this morning. Daniel had not threatened to leave. He had not argued. He had not begged her to reconsider. He had quietly made his decision and followed through. For years, she had believed he would always be there, patiently waiting for her to come home. She had never imagined a day when he would stop waiting. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Mommy. Emily turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, clutching the stuffed dolphin Jason had bought her. Are you crying? Emily quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. I'm okay, sweetheart. Lily stepped closer. Was it Daddy? Emily couldn't lie. She nodded. Lily looked down at the floor. Is Daddy mad at us? The innocent question broke something inside Emily. She knelt and gently held her daughter's shoulders. No, sweetheart. I don't think he's mad. Then why didn't he come? Emily opened her mouth but couldn't find the right words. Lily's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want Uncle Jason to come. Emily frowned slightly. What do you mean? I wanted Daddy. The words came out in a trembling whisper. When everyone was taking family pictures, Lily lowered her head. I wish Daddy was standing next to us. A tear rolled down her cheek. When Jason played with me, I kept pretending he was Daddy. Emily's heart ached. Lily had never accepted Jason's place on the trip. She had simply endured it because she trusted her mother. I thought if I behaved really well, Lily continued softly, maybe Daddy would surprise us. Emily pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. I'm so sorry. Lily buried her face against her mother's shoulder. You promised we'd all go together. I know. You promised. Those two words hurt more than any accusation. Emily had spent the entire vacation convincing herself that Daniel would understand. She had never stopped to ask what Lily understood. Now she knew. Her daughter had not wanted explanations. She had wanted her father. A knock came at the hotel room door. Jason stepped inside, carrying breakfast from the cafe. I thought I'd bring everyone's favorite. He stopped when he saw Emily crying. What happened? Emily slowly stood. For the first time since the trip began, she looked at him without warmth or gratitude. Only exhaustion. Daniel left. Jason looked confused. Left where? He accepted an overseas position. We're getting divorced. The smile disappeared from Jason's face. I'm sorry. He took a cautious step forward. Emily will figure this out. Instinctively, he reached toward her shoulder. Emily stepped back. The movement surprised them both. She looked at him for several long seconds. Then she finally understood something she had refused to see before. Jason had never forced his way into her life. She had opened the door herself. Every time she dismissed Daniel's feelings. Every time she insisted Jason's presence wasn't important. Every time she chose convenience over communication. Jason had become a constant reminder of the distance growing inside her marriage. It wasn't really about him. It was about the choices she had made. "I need some time alone," she said quietly. Jason nodded. Without another word, he placed the breakfast on the table and left the room. Emily looked around the suite. 3 suitcases stood near the entrance. One belonged to her. One belonged to Lily. The third belonged to Jason. There should have been another one. Daniel's. The empty space beside the luggage suddenly felt enormous. She finally understood that families rarely fall apart because of a single dramatic moment. They break apart through countless small choices that seem harmless until one day there is nothing left to hold together. As she held Lily close, Emily realized the vacation she believed would create happy memories had become the moment she lost the life she thought would always be waiting for her. Emily insisted on leaving the resort before sunrise. The family vacation ended 2 days early. There were no more beach walks, no farewell dinners, no plans to visit the nearby lighthouse that Lily had been excited about for weeks. Everything that had once seemed important suddenly felt meaningless. The drive to the airport passed in near silence. Lily sat beside the window, clutching her backpack without saying a word. Jason offered several times to help carry their luggage. Each time, Emily quietly declined. When they reached the departure terminal, Jason finally spoke. "I can drive you home after we land." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "No, I'll manage." The answer was calm, but final. Jason nodded slowly. For the first time since the trip began, he realized something had changed between them. The woman who had always welcomed his company now kept a careful distance. Several hours later, Emily's taxi pulled into the driveway of our home. She didn't even wait for the driver to unload her suitcase. She rushed toward the front door, fumbling with her keys. "Daniel," her voice echoed through the empty house. No answer. She searched every room, the kitchen, the living room, our bedroom, my home office. Everything was spotless. Nothing looked broken or disturbed. Yet something was missing. The framed family photograph that had always stood beside my desk was gone. Several books had disappeared from the shelf. My favorite coffee mug no longer sat beside the machine. The closet where I kept my travel jackets stood half empty. Only then did Emily fully understand. I hadn't packed in anger. I had packed carefully, methodically, like someone preparing for a journey long before anyone else realized it had begun. Her phone rang. It was Grace Turner. Emily answered immediately. "Please tell me there's still time." Grace's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry. Mr. Brooks' flight departed 3 hours ago." Emily slowly sank onto the living room sofa. 3 hours. Even if she had driven straight to the airport instead of coming home, she never would have reached me. She covered her face with trembling hands. "I just wanted to talk to him." "I know." Grace paused before speaking again. "He asked me to leave something for you." Emily looked up. "What?" "There's a sealed envelope on the dining table. He requested that you read it only after he had left." The call ended quietly. Emily walked toward the dining room. There, exactly where Grace had described, rested a single white envelope. Her name was written across the front in my handwriting. She recognized it immediately. With shaking fingers, she opened the letter. Inside was only a few neatly written pages. She took a deep breath and began reading. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means I've already left. I know you'll probably believe I ended our marriage because of one vacation. I didn't." Emily's vision blurred. She continued reading through tears. "The vacation wasn't the reason. It was simply the moment I finally accepted what had been happening for a very long time. I stopped feeling like your husband. Somewhere along the way, I became the person you expected to understand every disappointment without ever asking whether I was hurting." Each sentence felt painfully familiar. Not because I exaggerated, because she remembered every moment I described. Emily continued reading with trembling hands. The tears on the page blurred my handwriting, but she refused to stop. "I never wanted to compete for a place in my own family. Not with your career. Not with your responsibilities. And certainly not with another man." She pressed a hand over her mouth. Every memory she had dismissed as harmless returned with painful clarity. Jason joining family dinners, inviting him to events without asking me first, assuring me that I was overthinking, expecting me to understand while rarely trying to understand me. The letter continued. I don't blame you for loving your work. I admired your dedication from the day we met. But I slowly realized I was asking for something very simple. I wanted to feel chosen. When I stopped feeling that, I also stopped recognizing our marriage. Emily closed her eyes. Daniel had never demanded grand gestures. He had only wanted to know that he still mattered. The final lines were short. Take care of Lily. She deserves parents who make her feel safe, loved, and important. I sincerely hope you find happiness. Goodbye. There was no anger, no accusation, no bitterness, only a quiet farewell from someone who had already mourned the marriage long before he left it. Emily folded the letter carefully against her chest. The silence in the house felt unbearable. A knock at the front door broke it. Jason stood outside. He looked uneasy. I heard you came home. Emily opened the door only halfway. What do you want? I wanted to make sure you and Lily were okay. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally, Jason lowered his head. There's something I should have admitted a long time ago. Emily remained silent. I always hoped. He struggled to finish the sentence. That one day you'd choose me. Her heart sank. You told me we were just friends. I meant it at first. He sighed. But my feelings changed. I kept telling myself that if your marriage was already struggling, maybe someday. He couldn't continue. Emily stared at him in disbelief. Every reassurance she had given Daniel echoed in her memory. Jason is just a friend. You're imagining things. There's nothing to worry about. Daniel had trusted her words, but his instincts had been warning him long before either of them admitted the truth. Emily slowly shook her head. You should go. Jason looked as though he wanted to say more. Instead, he nodded quietly and walked away. This time, she didn't watch him leave. She simply closed the door. That chapter of her life was over. Later that evening, Lily came downstairs carrying the stuffed dolphin Jason had bought during the trip. Without saying a word, she placed it on the hallway table. Emily noticed immediately. Sweetheart. Lily looked at the toy for a long moment. I don't want it anymore. Emily knelt beside her. You don't have to throw it away. I know. Lily's small voice trembled. I just don't want to keep pretending. Emily gently hugged her daughter. Lily buried her face against her shoulder. After a long silence, she whispered the question Emily feared most. Mommy. Yes. Why didn't you protect our family? Emily couldn't answer. There were no words that could undo months of neglected feelings. No explanation that could erase broken promises. She simply held Lily as tightly as she could while tears rolled down her face. For the first time, she fully understood the truth. Trust rarely disappears because of one dramatic mistake. It fades through countless small choices. Promises delayed. Feelings dismissed. Conversations avoided. One overlooked moment after another. Until eventually the person who once waited for you stops waiting altogether. 1 year changed my life in ways I never imagined. The overseas position that once felt like an impossible leap had become one of the best decisions I had ever made. Under my leadership, Horizon Global expanded into several new markets, and our international headquarters became known for innovation, integrity, and long-term partnerships. My days were still busy, but for the first time in years, work no longer consumed every part of my life. I had learned something important. Success meant very little if the people I loved felt invisible. That lesson shaped every decision I made. The greatest change, however, had nothing to do with business. It was Lily. After months of careful discussions and mediation, Emily and I agreed to a custody arrangement that placed Lily with me during the school year while she spent holidays and scheduled visits with her mother. It had not been an easy decision for either of us.